Welcome back to Good Morning La La Land. Andrew Tarvin is in the house, and I'm so excited to hear all about your book. He has a great story. Left his apartment in New York City 2 years ago with carrying on bags across the United States, traveled 50 states and gathered 50 stories. And here he is today to give us the lowdown.
Yeah, hello.
Thanks for being on the show.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
The world's first humor engineer. Here we go.
Making it happen.
Making it happen.
Did you guys work that out before?
No, we're not cool
Amazing.
enough to even try and make
No,
it
that was
happen.
just in the moment. Yeah.
That's what it is to be a humor engineer.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly. That's a big part
So
of it.
50 states, you're in La La Land. We want to hear, tell us about this.
Yeah, what inspired this story?
Yeah, so the inspiration for the book, called The United States of Laughter, is I was 31 years old, living in New York City. I was traveling a lot for work and decided, what happens if I don't actually have a home, right? Mm-hmm. So I put all my stuff in storage, thought I'd do it for 2 months, turned into 18 months, traveled 159,000 miles, which is about 6 trips around the globe equivalent.
Wow.
Spoke or performed in all 50 states, 14 countries, and on 3 continents. And what I realized is in the first 12 months, I went to all 50 states. And I had experienced so many cool journeys that I was like, I want to tell these stories of what I've picked up, and not just the big places, certainly LA, but then also the small places across the country. And so that's where the book comes from. It's a story from each state talking about my journey.
So were you just like, you came into the town and you were like, where's the nearest stand-up? Or like, where did you go speak?
Yeah, so it was in different spots all across, depending on what state I was in. So for example, I was in South Dakota. The only place that I could find in South Dakota to perform was a biker bar in Pringle, South Dakota. Pringle, population 112 people. And so me and my brother, who was with me at the time, we drive up, and it is at a biker bar, and it's like Harley Davidson, and like one regular bicycle for some reason.
Yeah, were you on a Harley Davidson?
I was not. We were in some rental Ford Focus or something. Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Someone pedaled someone that didn't get a Harley yet. You got a
man.
pedal there, right? Yeah, pedicab coming up or something. But there's a guy sitting on the porch with a gun on his knee, and we're like, we have no idea what to expect.
Seems comfortable.
Right, exactly. Right?
That's why I want to go speak.
But we go in and meet incredibly nice people. So like I perform, and a woman comes up to me afterwards, short black hair, 2 neck tattoos, a few missing teeth, no idea what she's going to say. And she's like, I don't know who you are, but I'm your newest fan.
Wow. That is no small feat.
Yeah.
Right?
But it's just one of the cool things that I experienced, and the reason why it's called the United States of Laughter, is that I realized, despite what we see on the news about how we're always kind of at odds with each other, there's still one thing that does unite all Americans, and that's laughter.
Wow. So true. We've been trying to incorporate more on the show. I'm actually taking an impromptu course over at the Groundlings, which is one of the supposedly one of the best impromptu schools, because I know that laughter is like key to connecting with people, and I got to bring it on, right?
Yeah. So you're doing Groundlings. I'm taking notes.
Yeah, right?
From you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I love that you kind of talk about preconceptions and walking into these places. And I read, being a Michigan girl, page 115 of this book, and your experience in Michigan. And I had to laugh because, well, you tell the story, and then you're funnier than me.
Right. Well, so Michigan is the worst, right? That's the title of the book.
I didn't even want to say the title because being a Michigan girl, I definitely have to disagree with you on that.
Right, but here's the thing. I grew up in Ohio, right? Born and raised, and so Ohio State-Michigan rivalry. But also my beef with people from Michigan, and Jasmine, you probably do this, is whenever you ask someone where they're from in Michigan, they love the fact that their state is shaped like a hand. They're like, oh, this is Michigan. I'm from right, like no other state does that.
Let me just point it out.
Right?
I'm from right here.
But see, when you ask me where I'm from in Ohio, I don't make like a makeshift Ohio. I'm not like.
Well, you should give people a better geographical understanding of where you're from.
Yeah, but like Italians aren't like, well, if Italy is a boot, I'm from Italy, right?
In LA, we're like, well, I live off the 405.
Yeah, it's all highway related.
Yeah, the street. So it's like, I'm from LA. Is that what LA looks like? I don't even know. No one knows what it looks like.
It's funny because also people from Michigan have this like hatred for people from Ohio simply because of the sports teams. I know when I go and visit Ohio, I tell people I'm from Indiana. Because if you say you're from Michigan, you're already like, ooh, on the outs.
Yeah, and so that was my kind of understanding going to Michigan. And so then I ended up having a fantastic time in Michigan, and I hated it. Right, because I want to keep the stereotype in my head that I hate Michigan, and so I go and I visit a friend, and we go to a park on a beautiful 80-degree day, and in this park there's one of those big slides that you can go down when like a burlap sack, and I'm like, the whole time I'm up at the top, I'm like, all right, just please let me like knock out a kid or like break a bone or something.
I gotta hate this
I got
place.
to justify
The Buckeyes won't
hating
like you.
Michigan,
Yeah.
right? They
But
don't like
you
me.
can't hate Michigan because we're so nice.
But so nice, and so that was, it was kind of a microcosm of what I believe travel can do, is that it changed my perception,
Oh, I
right?
love that.
When we only have the stereotype view of people based on pop culture, what other people tell us, we have one view. When we go there and actually experience, it's like, oh, that is different, right? And that's what made Michigan even worse, is that it added a learning lesson to my life, and I'm like,
But what about you being from New York and now being here in California? There's a lot of juxtapositions there too,
Mhm.
right?
yeah, absolutely. Like, I love LA. I love coming to LA. I've had fantastic experiences here, hiking up to Griffith Park. I do love In-N-Out.
Some good content around here for
Yeah,
humor.
absolutely.
Sure.
Lots of content, interesting people that you meet. But I also love New York. And I joke, I was like, I'll move to LA potentially when self-driving cars are a thing.
Right.
Right, when I don't have to deal with traffic.
So true.
So we want to know like some tips today. I want to know like how can we bring impromptu into the show?
Yeah,
Give
how
us
do you
some
add
tips.
impromptu to your life?
Right.
Yeah,
You know, how do you
absolutely.
make it
Well, so
funnier?
that's what I do for a living. Is now I have a degree in computer science and engineering, and I've always been an engineer and very much a nerd. And then I started doing improv and stand up in college, and that taught me human skills, right? Because I've always been good with computers, not so good with people, because people have emotions and feelings,
I know, they're
right?
messy. People are
Right?
messy.
Yeah, they're not
No.
efficient
Right.
at all.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But turns out that humor is effective with people. And so I started to explore that intersection of humor in the workplace, improv, and business. And that's what allowed me to travel, is doing all of this. That's what I do for a living, is I talk and work with organizations on that. And I teach people, because I believe humor is a skill.
Yeah.
Right? And if it's a skill, it can be learned. And I'm someone who's had to learn how to
So give us some
comedy.
tips. Somebody's watching right now. They're like,
Mhm.
okay, great story. What's in it for me? Like what can we tell them
How
today?
can I be funnier?
How can you be
Because I
funnier?
want to meet
Exactly.
more women.
Yeah.
Exactly. You want to be funny,
That's basically
or get paid more,
Right,
whatever it is.
exactly,
Right?
yes,
yeah.
love,
So
yeah.
the first thing that I say is, the first thing is share your perspective or your point of view a little bit more, right? If you think about very good stand-up comedians, whether it's Ellen or Chris Rock
They
or
all
Dave
have
Chappelle, they all have a very specific way of seeing the world, and they share that
Oh, yeah.
with people. So for like example, like, do any of you have any like irrational fears?
No, not at all. I've never been afraid of anything.
Yeah. No, all of my fears are very rational.
Exactly. They're all
I'm weirdly-
perfectly.
Yeah, I'm weirdly afraid of going down an escalator if it's not moving. So I get so nervous
Oh,
to walk
yeah.
down the steps of an escalator if it's not moving, like knees shaking. I don't know. I just feel like it's going to start and then I'm going to shoot off the thing and fall down.
Right, and then you're gonna get like grinded up down
Yeah,
at the bottom,
like,
because those are
grinded down.
basically teeth at the bottom, right?
Basically, I've lost a shoe to an escalator before, and now I am terrified.
Right? Yeah. Right. So you can take things and ideas like this, a different way of seeing the world, and then share that. So for example, I have an irrational fear that I'm gonna die by sneezing. Not that like a sneeze itself is gonna kill me, but I'm gonna be like driving along the road and like I'm gonna sneeze, hit my head on the steering wheel, fall off into a ravine, right?
Yeah,
So we start by sharing our perspective, our point of view a little bit more, and then from that we can explore and heighten, right? So that's what we learn in improvisation, is how to accept and build, or say yes and. We can say, if this is true, what else is true? So for example, for me, it took me going to the state of Florida
Yeah.
to realize the rapper Flo Rida
Yeah.
got his name from
Yeah.
his home state of Florida, and he put a space in it.
Yep.
Right? That blew my mind.
That
I don't
blows
know if you
my
guys
mind
knew
right
that.
now.
That blew my
Wait, I don't
mind.
get it.
Yeah. Flo
like-
Rida.
Florida.
Oh,
Space in it,
okay.
Flo Rida.
Oh,
Right? He
wow.
got his
Okay,
name,
got
Flo
it.
Rida.
Yeah.
So in comedy, we can say, if this is true, what else is true? We can say, all right, if it's true that you can create like a brand name by putting a space in it, what else could be true? Like, I feel like other places should do that,
Mm.
right? Like, I think there should be a Hispanic travel agency in Dover called De La Ware. Right? Or there could be a female internet detective in Biloxi who's married, who goes by Mrs. IPPI.
Okay, I
Right?
like
If
it.
this is
Just playing
true,
words.
yeah, exactly. If
Yeah.
this is true, what else is true? Take one concept and then build it. And then the last step is practice and repetition, right? We get better through practice and repetition, right? That's true
Right,
for anything. Like, I don't know if have you guys ever experienced where like you're in a meeting or in a conversation or like meeting someone, and then like a couple hours later you're like, I should have said this.
It happens every single day.
Every single day on the show, I rewatch it and I was like, oh, where was I on this one?
Yeah, I could have said that. That's actually a good thing. It's something called staircase wit. The idea like you're in a meeting and then later in the stairway you think of it. But what it means is that you have the comedic instinct, and then through practice and repetition, what you do is you take that ha-ha moment, realization happening 4 hours later, to only 3 hours later, to only 2 hours later, to only 10 minutes, to then happening in the moment, right? And that's why we say that reflection on the past leads to action in the future.
So it's like a muscle. Like
It's a-
we have to like constantly be thinking and like you train your mind.
Yeah, you train your mind. You create kind of a humorous kind of point of view or perspective on the world. Like in some ways, I think about it like we say that, you know, an optimist sees the glass as half full, pessimist sees the glass as half empty, an engineer says that the glass is twice as big as it needs to be.
Right.
Right? But a humorist says whether it's half full or half empty, I know that if I add just a little bit of sugar, that could be Kool-Aid. Right? It's just about changing your perspective a little bit about what you're doing.
As you're talking, I'm discovering like probably the biggest lesson learned from this conversation, and that is simply just to bring him along with you to
Yeah,
parties,
yeah.
so you can be funny and I can take credit.
Well, and that's the beauty of like
awesome.
that's what you learn in
Right.
improv
Yeah.
is how to yes and build off of each other and set something up. And so it's not always about being the funny one yourself, but setting
Teaming
someone
up.
else for that
Well, and
success.
it's important to note, though, too, that he wasn't always funny. You know, we mentioned earlier it's something that he learned, he taught himself. And one of the most
Thank
interesting,
goodness.
yeah,
I know.
one of the most interesting things that I know personally about Drew is he is one of the most analytical people I have ever met.
You
He is-
engineers are all like that.
Oh,
Like,
yeah.
no, go
He's got a spreadsheet, an Excel sheet for everything, even down to laughs per minute of what works
Yeah,
and
that's
the
amazing.
science behind the
Wow.
joke.
Wow.
Yeah, and that's I
I
think
gotta read it.
yeah, I think
gotta
that's
read it.
partially what has allowed me to be a trainer of this is that in a way I've kind of reverse engineered comedy and kind of looked at what works and what doesn't because you know like I said I've done over 1,000 shows and stand up improv all that kind of thing. I've done all 50 states and I recently went to my high school reunion and when people found out that I did comedy they're like but you're not funny,
Right.
right? Because like growing up, I was never the life of the
So
party of
funny,
the class clown. My senior superlative was I was voted teacher's pet.
Wow. So I have a
Um,
question for you. So
Yeah.
say someone's watching right now
Mhm.
and they want to develop the skill, whether they're a comedian or they just say, you know what, I just want to have more fun in my life.
Yeah.
I know you've probably been to LA a few times, so you must know some places.
Yeah.
What can they do in LA specifically?
Well, I think improv is a great place to start. That's how I got started. I went to school at the Ohio State University, got a degree in computer science and engineering, but my best friend there wanted to start an improv group. He needed people and forced me to join. And so I got into it through improvisation. I think that's a great way for people to do that. So I think Groundling certainly is one.
Sure.
UCB, IO West is out here. Comedy Sports is great for short form improv. There's plenty of opportunities, and it's all just about that practice and repetition.
I'm really curious for you personally, as a person who wasn't funny, what did you like about improv? Because that wasn't a natural transition for
Right.
you, I wouldn't think.
No, well, what's beautiful about improv is, and taking these types of classes, is that it creates a safe space. Because if you think about trying to be funny, and it's like, oh, I want to go and do stand up, to a lot of people, that's very intimidating.
Absolutely.
Whereas in improv classes, you're in a smaller group with a group of people who are all trying to do the same thing, and there's no one like Instagram living that or anything like that. If you mess something up, if you say something weird, if it's not funny at all, no one sees, right? It's done. You're over with it. And so it's just about creating that safe space. And that's what my programs are as well, is to create people and give people an opportunity to practice this skill in a safe environment so that later when they're applying it, whether it's in an interview to try to get a job or to manage their own stress at work or to try to impress someone at the bar, then they're comfortable because they've already had the practice and reps of it.
Love that. I had a question. Yeah. So you've had this incredible success. You wrote this just really interesting book about being a human engineer and your travels across the United States. And I wonder, at any point in time, did you ever, go someplace and have had an act or a performance, and it just felt completely flat and it didn't work at all?
Yeah, so I was it's not in the book, but during my nomadic travels, I went to Singapore for some work and saw that there was a stand-up show in Malaysia. So I was like, all right, let me go to Malaysia and do stand-up. And I did terribly. I bombed like I haven't bombed in a long time. And part of me was like, you know what, maybe it was my first time doing stand-up in an Asian country. I was like, maybe that just culturally
gap.
people, they don't laugh that much and maybe it's more reserved. And then the guy got up after me and he crushed it.
Oh,
He
no.
nailed
Oh,
it.
no.
He was like one of the funniest
Yeah.
people like I've ever seen. And his funniest joke was him making fun of my
Oh
set.
no, that's the
no.
funniest.
How'd you
Yeah.
It was
It
like,
felt great, right?
yeah, oh, yeah, it felt fantastic. I was like, I gotta keep doing.
Give me more of that.
Yeah,
Wow.
but
Oh.
what I made the mistake of assuming material that works in Europe would work in Asia. I
Oh,
didn't
yeah,
understand
right.
my audience, and one of the things about humor is that's really important is understanding who your audience is, what they know, what they need, what they expect, and your relationship to them. Like how are you
That's such a great point.
perceived?
So speaking of that exact thing, we
Mhm.
want to do a segment called That's So LA, which
Mhm.
is really speaking to the audience of Los Angeles. So I was wondering maybe you could take us through an exercise. What would that
Yeah.
look like if you're going, okay, I'm going to teach you guys how to do some improv. Let's whatever brainstorm on That's So LA.
Well, yeah. So interestingly, we're in our first few days of
Mhm.
production. We're still trying to figure out what our dynamic is and what we can contribute and deal with our community in Los Angeles. So
Yeah.
there's something.
Well, and I think so that's so LA is based on observational humor, right?
Mhm.
So, one of the things that I train on is that there's various tools and shortcuts that humorists use to create comedy. Things like association, right, which is comparing two things unique together. Things like
Yeah, like New
incongruity.
York versus LA,
Right.
dating
Yeah.
and all kinds of stuff.
Exactly, yeah. So you can do kind of a that's so LA of like in comparison to other places,
Yeah.
right? That's so LA versus New York. That's so LA versus Chicago, right? There can be a lot of interesting juxtapositions there, or just observational humor. Like, what are the things that, breathe LA? So traffic is certainly one of them. So what are the
Juicing,
activities?
yoga,
Yeah.
Step and repeats.
Yeah, and specifically, what is the approach to it? So I would be curious from you guys. If you're sitting in traffic, what's your strategy?
Split lanes.
Split
As
lanes,
fast
on your
as I
bike?
possibly can.
On a
Yes.
bike,
Split lanes. Do not look side to side so that people don't get mad.
Yeah,
They can't-
exactly. Well, and so here's
share
the
their
thing.
anger with
So
me.
the story from Massachusetts is called Scientifically Justified Road Rage, because there's a lot of ways that people drive that actually aren't the most efficient ways to drive. Like, so for example, if you're driving down the highway and you see one of those like left lane close merge,
Yes.
it's actually scientifically more efficient for everyone if you stay in that lane until you have to get over, right? But instead, people start to get over and you cause this big, traffic jam. And so it's like understanding that we as humans are terrible drivers, which is why I look forward to the self-driving revolution because then we don't have to deal with it,
Yeah.
right? So I think understanding your approach. What's your approach in traffic?
Mine is like, let me see how much education I can get done while I'm in the hour traffic. So I turn on like a YouTube educational
Yeah.
thing I want to hear. I make the call that I want to.
So
Yeah.
I do like all like, how can I make this the best use of time?
Absolutely. So I think one of the things that might be so LA is that your most productive time is sitting in traffic.
Yeah, totally.
Right? It's so
Yeah.
LA that your
Mhm.
car is more
Exactly,
productive
yeah.
than your office place.
Yeah, that's
Right?
awesome.
That's an LA thing.
Yeah.
See?
Right?
So you can explore those observations, and again, it comes from sharing that point of view. What do you
Right.
do? What's your traffic strategy?
This is terrible. I get ready. So between here and there, in my car, I have this little Fiat. I have got probably 4 pairs of shoes. I've got like a closet
She's
full
like
of clothes. And
rinsing her
yeah,
arms.
no, I've
She's
got
like-
exactly. I made a little YouTube video about it. I've got the deodorant. I'll put on my makeup because not while I'm driving, but there's a lot of stop and there's a lot
Mhm.
of pause. So I'm totally getting myself
Right.
ready to go.
Right?
So if not for traffic, you would look terrible everywhere you went.
Absolutely.
Right? So that's a benefit of so LA, right? It's so LA.
Absolutely.
So we don't have much more time.
Mhm.
But first, I just want to say thank you so much for coming on. But what do you think? Last tips for people in LA. What do? I go out to name those places real quick again.
Yeah, so UCB, Groundlings, Comedy Sports, IO West are all great, fantastic places. Certainly go and experience comedy a little bit more. You kind of can learn through a little bit through osmosis. But the biggest thing that I talk about in all of my programs is that, positivity, humor, all these things ultimately come down to a choice, right? You decide every single day about how you're going to approach your work or how you're going to approach life. And so in the context of work, what I talk about is like, no one can control how you think. Even if you're in an environment where you don't think that you have the skill set or you don't think that it's welcome, no one can control how you're thinking about things. No one can prevent you from listening to a comedy podcast while you're stuck in traffic as a way to relieve stress. Or one of the things that I do when I'm going through emails is I start to read each of the different emails in a different accent in my head. Right?
Are there good podcasts or newsletters or things that you recommend for people?
I mean,
The
there's
book,
tons of them.
The United States of Laughter,
Yeah.
right here.
Yeah, there is an audiobook version of this. So if you want me to
Cool.
read you stories in the car, because I read it, pick up the audiobook. And there's tremendous amounts. There's comedy just about anything. But certainly if people want to learn more, find out more, get personal recommendations, happy to make those. They can just kind of reach out and happy to share those. But just find the things that you like, right?
And where can they find you online?
So you can find me Drew Tarvin on social media, whether that's Instagram. I tweet puns like pretty much every day. That's my I love wordplay. So if you want puns, at Drew Tarvin. Same thing on Facebook, or you can find out more at andrewtarvin.com.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to have to definitely hit you up on giving some feedback as I get into my improv. So you can find his book, The United States of Laughter. And so looking forward to it. Anything else
Yeah.
to say?
No, thank you just
Yeah,
so much for the
absolutely.
laughs. Let's do that handshake again.
Yes.
We're
Boom, we'll
out.
explode it.
I
There
can't
we
even
go.
follow that up, man.
Yeah.
Keep it simple.
Here we go. Yeah.
Oh,
Here we go. Here we go. Nice.
Yeah,
Well
exactly.
done. Well done.
Very
Thank
professional.
you so
Very
much for
professional.
making us laugh this morning. We
Thank you
really
so
Yeah.
appreciate it.